We can do this. What if this all just falls apart?
There's just too much pressure.
I don't know what our next move should be.
I'm completely out of ideas.
Come on. There has to be something we haven't thought of. We can do this.
Maybe if we just get a fresh perspective.
What if we...
No, we couldn't possibly.
Okay, you're right. But could we...
You're mad, but it just might work.
Oh well, any thoughts on the show?
Not really. We'll just wing it as usual.
Parker, you got anything?
I'm hungry.
Me too. Let's go find a snack.
Live from Studio A, somewhere inside the great state of Kansas, it's Leadership Late Night, brought to you by the Kansas Leadership Center. I'm DJ AJ, rocking the beats while also holding on to the Whetter Household Jenga Championship. Tonight's guest, the president and CEO of the Kansas Health Foundation, Reggie Robinson. Now, your host, my dad, and a man who always sweats the small stuff, DJ Whetter.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Leadership Late Night. I'm your host, DJ Whetter. Thank you for staying up late for a little bit of leadership. Got a great guest for you tonight in Reggie Robinson. We'll get to that very shortly. And as a reminder, always, you can join us on the after party on Zoom. We'll post that link in the chat box. That said, look, it's been an interesting news week around the nation. In some capacity, all 50 states are now in some sort of self-defined process to reopen. And as restrictions are relaxed that were meant to lessen the spread of COVID-19 in this country, look, one of the biggest questions appears to be whether or not to wear a mask. The Center for Disease Control recommends facial coverings in situations where social distancing, in other words, staying more than 6 feet apart, may be difficult, like grocery stores, pharmacies. And a new poll out today suggests that 84% of Americans have worn a mask in public. Even along party lines, that holds pretty steady, with 89% of Democrats and 81% of Republicans saying they have worn a mask. The older you are, the more likely you are to wear a mask, according to the poll as well. And yet, a few high-profile stories around the nation seem to suggest that whether or not you wear a mask may be starting to become some sort of outward symbol for where your politics lie. That's frustrating. Look, the virus ought to remind us of our shared humanity. No one is immune. And since last week, my guest, Kami Akavan from the USC Center for the Political Future, has been ringing in my head. He told us we have to, quote, figure out how to disagree better. And with that in mind, I want to let you know my family will be wearing masks in public for the foreseeable future. It's our choice. And to be honest, science suggests it's a choice that does more for those who are near us than for us. Medical grade fitted masks protect the wearer. The cloth masks the CDC is asking us to wear are about protecting others from our germs in case we are an asymptomatic carrier of COVID-19. The danger in our decision is it can create a false sense of security. Even with the mask, social distancing is just as, if not more, important. And another danger is a sense of self-righteousness, a sense that our decision makes us better than those who choose not to wear masks. I'd love to lie to you and say that that thought hasn't crossed my mind. But just as I want to tell that story to myself, enters my colleague from KLC, Chris Green, the managing editor of the KLC Journal. In a piece I will implore you to read later in this show, Green writes this: wearing a mask isn't evidence of righteousness on its own either. If the purpose of wearing a mask is to protect others, that consideration and regard need to be extended more broadly. People must avoid the temptation to fail to see the humanity in those who make decisions they disagree with, even if they see those decisions as selfish, short-sighted, or fearful. Whether or not we choose to wear a literal mask in public, let me remind you we're all masking something. We humans are made up of vulnerabilities, insecurities, and past histories that we hide every day. Author Marty Rubin once wrote, "Behind every mask there's a face, and behind that a story." I'd like to encourage us to be curious of others' stories in this time. There's no joke here. Let's be honest, if you've watched this show, there rarely are. But in a week where I have personally sat with my personal urge to polarize a pandemic, all I can do is use what platform I have to implore all of you to seek humanity, seek stories, seek common ground. And I have my colleague Chris to thank for that reminder. DJ AJ, you hit the beats, I'll hit the desk.
You got it.
All right, and welcome back to the Leadership Late Night Desk, and thanks for sticking with us through some technical difficulties this evening. The East Studio A Bay at Kansas Leadership Center, somewhere in the heart of the state of Kansas, as DJ AJ likes to tell us, just not kind this evening. But here we are. Stream appears to be a little wonky, so bear with us, but so far, so good. And I want to get right to the action. You've waited long enough, and we've got a couple fun segments tonight and a great interview. So that said, again, welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging with us tonight. And I want to get us started with a little leadership advice, as we often do here on Leadership Late Night. And tonight, as you know, per usual, it comes to us from one of our favorite teachers, a 6-year-old.
No. I don't care.
Leadership lessons,
From a 6-year-old.
still sponsored by
Nobody.
This has been Leadership Lessons,
From a 6-year-old.
still sponsored by...
Nobody.
Hey, I wanted to remind you all of our Civic Engagement Advisory Committee, and I thought this quote this week was just perfect given our leadership lesson from young Parker David Whetter. Take a look at what Dalton has to share with us. And so just a reminder, I'll share a couple of civic engagement quotes each week on the show, and I think it's important to think about how we can still be civically engaged, even in a time where we still remain at home at times. Well, it's time to bring on our guest. You've waited long enough. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to talk with our guest tonight, Reggie Robinson. Reggie, of course, is the president and CEO of the Kansas Health Foundation, and we have a wide-ranging interview tonight discussing what it's like to run a foundation right now and think about how you be flexible in an industry that's really not all that easy to be flexible. And also, we talk leadership, as Reggie has long been a board member for the Kansas Leadership Center. Enjoy Reggie Robinson in our Leadership Library. Reggie Robinson, welcome to the Leadership Library. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm happy to be here. Always good to be in a library.
Right? The books are real. Don't, I'll
Okay, I
invite you over
wondered about
sometime.
that.
That's a real background, I swear, Reggie.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, give us a little background on what life has been like for you over the last 6 weeks. It's certainly unprecedented times. That's a word that's gotten thrown around a lot. What has this experience been like for you personally?
It's been interesting. I mean, words like unprecedented get used so often, and when you finally find yourself in a situation that truly merits application of the word, it doesn't seem like a big enough word to actually capture what you're experiencing. Balancing just the idea of working at home with the need that I think we all have to separate our work lives from the rest of our lives. I think that separation challenge is more acute and more difficult when you're working from home and not typically in a work from home situation, and you're doing it as a part of this kind of a response. But it's been challenging, but it's also been rewarding to be where I am, leading this organization at a time when we've got this massive health crisis that we're all trying to respond to.
Robinson brings a diverse resume of experience to the Kansas Health Foundation. He took over in December after Steve Cohen's retirement last year. Reggie has served as president and CEO of the Kansas Board of Regents. He was a faculty member at both Washburn and University of Kansas Schools of Law, a White House Fellow, a Special Assistant to Attorney General Janet Reno, and a Deputy Associate Attorney General for the United States.
The big takeaway so far has been how close so much of our population is to sort of low-end Maslow's hierarchy of need when we have to deal with this kind of a situation. I mean, I think most people have seen the reports of the lines at food banks, just the incredible demand there is for basic necessities like food. And of course, when we think about the mission of the Health Foundation, a lot of people don't connect that immediately to food security. But of course, obviously, food security is an important foundational requirement for health.
That understanding led KHF to immediately put $2 million towards food security efforts in the state of Kansas.
And even as we're doing that, and I think that's a significant contribution, seems like it anyway, it kind of feels like a drop in the bucket, because you still see this incredible demand out there that even that kind of contribution feels like it's only scratching the surface. So it's just the fragility of our circumstances, the fragility around hunger and food, the fragility around access to health, and the viability of organizations that deliver health care. I mean, for me, fragility is a major sort of takeaway that comes to me from this so far.
What does that fragility tell us about our work moving forward as we continue to try to make progress in these times? Are there adjustments that need to happen?
If you're really going to provide for an environment where Kansans have an opportunity to be truly and fully healthy, you have to look behind the curtain of the health issues per se that are presenting themselves. And for me, this crisis puts an accent on the need to do that, puts a real exclamation point on the need to really explore behind the curtain, to identify the social determinants, and to really step up the work around addressing those social determinants. The good news is that that's the only way that you're really going to deal with what's presenting itself. The challenging news is identifying those social determinants, identifying those issues behind the curtain. That's step one. Figuring out how to really move the needle as it relates to those issues is incredibly complicated, incredibly difficult. But if nothing else, the challenges that we're experiencing now tell me that we have to do that.
And in these urgent times, that means rethinking the foundation's work in 2020.
And for me, it became clear that as the Health Foundation, we had really three important priorities that we needed to then focus our work around. First, we needed to make sure that we took care of our people, so organizational viability for the foundation, the health of the foundation, and so focusing on supporting the people in the foundation so that we would be viable and ready to pick up our work at the end of this was job one. job too. We can't do the work that we're trying to do to improve the health of all Kansans unless our partners are viable. The people that we make grants to, they're our partners as we try to improve the health around the state. And so their viability became job two for us. So we put in place all kinds of flexibility for our grantees, relaxed all kinds of reporting requirements, gave them permission to shift the use of their money to ensure their viability. Because at the end of this, if we're going to pick up the work that we've been trying to do, we can't do it on our own. We need partners to do that. And so we thought it was important to take the steps now to help ensure that viability. The third job was to do what we can as the Health Foundation to support massive efforts across the state to get us through that crisis. And so we've repurposed grant money to do that. We've created some new grant programs that enable folks to be responsive to this crisis. And so for us at the foundation, it's been about ensuring our viability, ensuring the partnership viability that we have, and then making the contribution that we can make to help the state respond effectively to this crisis, and we've tried to do that in a number of ways.
One of the ways that KHF takes a unique perspective on improving the health of all Kansans is through the continued grant funding of the Kansas Leadership Center.
We've said we think if you improve the civic health of this state, the civic engagement and civic leadership in Kansas, we believe that the health of Kansans and the health of Kansas will improve. And that's why we're so proud to invest in KLC. And over time, right, we will see whether the bet we've made in the connection between improved civic leadership and improved health is a winning bet. I think it is. And I think there's so much data that demonstrates that that connection there is pretty strong and pretty palpable. And that's why we've been so enthusiastic about supporting KLC. And that's what led the foundation, I think, in a really wise move to take the step to create KLC. I think that connection's there, and our hope and our commitment is to support KLC as it does work that will ultimately demonstrate the value and presence of that link.
Robinson's roots with KLC run deep. Reggie was invited to be on the board during the creation of the Leadership Center.
It's too limiting to see improving the health of a population, improving the health of a state. It's too limiting, and I think ultimately ineffective to limit the work that you're doing in that regard to the things that seem obviously connected to health, like access to health. And I think Steve Cohen, my predecessor, even Marnie before him, saw this connection between leadership and health. And I think that was informed by conversations that Marnie had, that Steve had, and then ultimately as CEO of the Leadership Center, that Ed had, as he went around the state talking about daunting challenges the state of Kansas confronts. And in those conversations, leadership emerged as something that Kansans saw as connected to their overall well-being.
That focus on thinking about the multiple perspectives that affect a challenge takes Robinson back to a number of foundational experiences in his early life.
Between college and law school, I spent 4 years as a field artillery officer in the United States Army. One of the things that you learn in that environment, I think if you're effective, is, the mission is the driver, right? And that's one of the most important lessons I took away from my time in the Army, is that really everything is around mission. That's how you orient your team. That's what you focus on. That's the driver that determines what you do and how you do it. It's sort of a mission focus. And during a time like this, when you're in crisis, you're in the context of a crisis, and you've got a team of folks that you're trying to lead, and they're all dispersed, sort of keeping focus. A second facet of experience that I'm drawing on is really my time at the Justice Department. I mean, I remember sort of being at DOJ and hearing the news that the Oklahoma City bombing had happened, and just the response to that crisis. I mean, I was in the part of the department that had a connection to the Office for Victims of Crime, and that office had to be really energized and helping to respond to the victims of that horrible crisis. I actually then later assumed directorship of the Office for Victims of Crime, and then did extensive work supporting the victims of that crisis during the trial as it took place not in Oklahoma, but in Denver. And so providing support for victims and family members to be present during those trials, to provide support for them as they were trying to put their lives back together. Just what you learn in trying to be responsive in a time of crisis carries over when you think about what kind of appropriate steps you should be taking now as we're trying to deal with a crisis from our perspective here at the foundation.
Leave us here a thought of hope or progress, maybe a story you've seen. What propels you forward and anchors you in the work as we continue on this journey?
The hopeful nugget in all of this is the general innate desire that people have to want to be helpful and to want to be positive and to want to make a contribution. The real challenge around that is for leadership to find effective ways to engage what I think is an innate desire out there to want to make a positive difference and move things in a positive direction. So I'm hopeful because I think people as a general rule want to do the right thing, want to be helpful, want to make a difference. And the challenge for leaders is to channel that and to energize and engage it in ways that move the needle, in ways that we all hope that we can do.
Reggie, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership Late Night.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You take care of yourself.
Well, welcome back to the desk. I want to throw up another Civic Engagement Advisory Committee quote, this time from our good friend Jim in Olathe, talking about access to healthcare. And I thought this quote was especially appropriate given the interview with Reggie. I also I want to discuss this for a moment. I feel like Reggie's comments off the top were a suggestion that he couldn't believe I would ever actually be in a real library. I don't know how others feel about that, but I'm trying not to take offense. The other fun thing this evening is my green screen. It continues to give me a hole in the head, and that may explain what my previous 30 minutes was like before this show, trying to get us to go live. So it's one of those fun nights, and I just want to thank you one more time for sticking with us here on Leadership Late Night, right? We just transform. I guess that's the beauty of the internet. We can do this show anytime as long as we've got an audience, and we do tonight. I'm very thankful for those of you sticking with us. Hey, you heard in my opening monologue this comment on a new post that's on the klcjournal.com from Chris Green, our managing editor of the Journal. I just think the world of the work he does. Not only is it a piece that goes into detail about how we might work across factions when it feels like a pandemic is being politicized, polarized, any other P words you can think of, but he also does such a great job of linking to other sources that really give you a perspective of all the news that is out there around this story. And so I can't recommend enough. I do it every week, but I want to recommend it even more highly this week if possible, to spend some time at klcjournal.com and really take some time to not only engage Chris's story, but engage across the platform by checking out the other links that are present there and that will allow you to just access so much as you kind of think through this. Because I continue to tell myself this mantra. It was told to me by a colleague out in the faith community. And he said, when I think about what's going on in the world, I just remember we don't have to do that here. And I believe this suggestion is the reminder that we do control ourselves. If nothing else, we control ourselves, right? We talk about the ABCs sometimes at the Kansas Leadership Center. When we're triggered, that first we be aware of it, right? Just be aware of our triggers. B stands for breathe. I think it's also a reminder, do something physical. If you study brain science, and I haven't really, but I know enough to pretend, when we talk about flipping our lid, right, that old saying, we know there's literally a disconnect when we are emotionally triggered between our rational brain and our emotional brain. And to get those two back working in concert, we actually have to do something physical. At the very least, breathe. Deep breaths, take some time to breathe. I should have reminded myself of that from about 9 to 9:30 this evening before we went live. And what we do after that is then the C. We can make a conscious choice. And so I find myself again in these times thinking about my ABCs thinking about what's my role in the mess when it feels like I want to blame the other in this pandemic, and just continuing to remind myself that there is something higher that we all connect to. There is a collective purpose, and that's getting through this time of COVID-19 together. We've got to be able to see each other. And it strikes me, for those that are wearing masks, all you can see is their eyes, all right? And I think it's hard to read. There's no facial expressions. Let's give each other a little grace out there. Let's stick with each other and understand that we're all going to make different decisions, but we do have a shared purpose in this. And I hope that that will be a reminder. As I speak to myself, I hope it says something to the rest of you out there. Just a couple comments to share tonight as we wrap up our show and head over to the after party. Anybody who wants to stay up late, we'd love to have you for just a few minutes. We'll keep it short this evening, in the after party. Amy, great to have you on Leadership Late Night tonight. And Amy weighs in on the interview with Reggie. And again, send in your comments if you've got any final words of wisdom you'd like to share before we wrap up the show. Amy says, focusing on viability to address fragility through partnerships and flexibility. Great perspective and great wordsmithing there, Amy. Just one of the most dynamite comments we've ever gotten here on Leadership Late Night. But yeah, let me break that down for a minute, right? Focusing on viability to address fragility through partnerships and flexibility. And I think what Reggie's suggesting there, and through the wordsmithing of Amy, is this idea that when we hold to purpose, sometimes it can actually cause us to move really slowly, to say there's nowhere to act. But in this time, I keep thinking back to past interviews on this show, the idea, I think it was Kenny Wilk with the University of Kansas Health System, vice president, that said, sometimes we just have to intervene, and it might not be all that skillful, but we have to rely on grace and understanding because the times call for action. And I think Reggie's talking about that, yeah, they had some set purpose, and they still do, but the time called for action, and they made some major adjustments in 2020, and I think that is such an impressive feat for a foundation. How about Julian weighing in tonight, not only running tech, not only standing behind the scenes as I tried to connect to Facebook Live tonight, but also commenting. Thank you, Julian. Everything is around mission focus. I feel a very close tie to hold to purpose, and during these crazy times, purpose can feel murky, but it's so important to be clear on it, to mobilize people to make progress. Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful point. I think it's baked into what Amy said. I think it's baked into what Reggie said. This idea of either holding to purpose, or when we're stuck on strategy, when we find ourselves debating, and debating's not bad as long as we can find a way to disagree better, to ask more questions, to listen to understand, right? We want to debate. We want to raise conflict. We want to find healthy ways to work through conflict, but we've got to do it in ways that call us to higher purpose. And so when we're stuck on strategy, think about taking it to purpose. Can we both agree we'd like the world to get back to normal? We'd like to get past this pandemic? Okay, well then we can disagree on what those terms look like, and maybe let's do it at a distance of at least 6 feet apart. That'll do it for tonight on Leadership Late Night. As always, we'll end with our moments of hope. But before that, DJ AJ, you better get to bed. Good night.
Good night, Dad. Make sure to go join Dad's after party on Zoom.
Of kids that have passed out post belly rubs.